HTML forms are the only mechanism available in HTML that is able to send information to the web server. All of the buttons and text boxes you've added in previous lessons have been form controls. HTML forms are relatively simple, but they are the backbone of ASP.NET. First, open the HTML test sample file from your sample files folder. And open formstest.htm in Design View. A .htm file is a pure HTML file that doesn't contain any of ASP.NET's special features. Browsers will recognize HTML files with both the .htm and .html file extensions, but .htm is the file extension favored by Visual Studio. You'll recognize the design of this page as an HTML table with some text in the cells. You're going to turn this into your form. First, you're going to add an input text control from the HTML category of the toolbox. Place it in the top right cell of the table. The input text control is the HTML equivalent of the ASP.NET text box control, which you'll learn all about in Lesson 4.4. You're now going to set the name property of the new control to name. The name property is used to identify the data that will be sent by the form. You have to set the name property in this lesson because you're using a pure HTML form. When you start using ASP.NET controls later on, you won't need to worry about the name property anymore, because ASP.NET will handle it automatically. Next, add an input checkbox control to the cell next to Confirm. The input checkbox control is the HTML equivalent of the ASP.NET checkbox control, which you'll learn all about in Lesson 4.5. Set the name property of the checkbox to Confirm. Next, add an input submit control to the bottom cell of the table. The input submit control is used to send the contents of the form to the server. It's the equivalent of the ASP.NET button control, which you'll learn more about in Lesson 4.2. Switch to Source View now. As you can see, there are no ASP elements at all. This is a pure HTML page that could be served by any web server to any web browser. That's not true of ASP.NET code, however. ASP.NET websites must be hosted on a server running the Windows operating system and Microsoft's IIS web server software. Many web hosting services on the Internet use the open-source Linux operating system and Apache web server software instead. There's a big cost saving associated with this, as the web hosting service doesn't have to pay for Linux or Apache. While Apache doesn't support ASP.NET, it does support a similar set of technologies based on the PHP programming language. PHP is an open-source alternative to ASP.NET, which is favored by hobbyists. Many web bulletin boards can be found with passionate arguments about whether PHP or ASP.NET is best. There's no real answer to this question, but many agree that PHP is more suitable for smaller projects, while ASP.NET makes it easier to work with large and complex projects. To continue, you need to set the action property of the form tag. You can do this by typing the property manually, or by simply clicking on the form tag and setting it in the Properties window. Set the action property to formSubmit.aspx. The action property tells the form where to send the data when the Submit button is clicked. FormSubmit.aspx is an ASP.NET web page that will process the data and display it. When using ASPX pages, you'll never need to manually set the action property. You'll learn more about how ASP.NET sends and receives data in Lesson 3.11. View formstest.htm in your browser, complete the form, and click Submit. You are redirected to formsubmit.aspx, which receives the data you entered and displays it. Almost everything ASP.NET does revolves around this system of HTML forms sending data to the web server. Visual Studio generates most of the HTML code that makes this work automatically, but with the knowledge you've gained from this lesson, you should be able to understand what it is doing behind the scenes. You've now completed Lesson 2.12, Work with HTML Forms.